Richard Balletta is the criminal section chief of the Labor Bureau at Nassau County DA's office in New York. And he has been working on labor-related cases for over 30 years with both the New York Attorney General's office, their Labor Bureau, where he helped form their criminal prosecution division, and in the administration of the New York State Department of Labor. We are extremely pleased to have this experienced prosecutor present a case study on corporate wage theft, which he tried while at the New York Attorney General's office. So welcome.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I just want to go over and just reiterate some of the things that some of our former speakers have said. And, one goes to what Susan was saying. And, I have been doing this for 25 some odd years, but this is still in its, as far as it goes criminally, this is still in its infancy. And when Susan started in 2015 or 16, I think she said, this was something that no one in Minnesota probably ever heard about or thought about. And besides the challenges she had in putting together a case with the different multiple jurisdictions she had to deal with, there's a certain education that you need to give to the courts and the other law enforcement community in your jurisdictions. Because as everyone has said before, everyone thinks that this is just civil. And Susan brought up a great point again, where she said, if as an employee on a construction site, I go steal, 25 2x4s to build something at my house, I'm going to be arrested and prosecuted. On the other hand, if the employee complains to the police that my employer didn't pay me for 4 weeks of wages where I worked 40 hours a week, they'll say this is a civil matter. So, and I know that I believe there are 95 participants here. So there's many jurisdictions here that I know have not, some I can see have done this before, but probably the vast majority of you haven't. And so there's a lot of education that has to be done. And one of the things also that Terry said is that it's important in the media. And the times are getting riper for this type of prosecution to go forward, in that it is being more accepted. And I'm just going to give you 2 examples of the media that happened to hit me this weekend. Okay, one was on the CBS Face the Nation, and there was a roundtable of freshman congress people, and one of the Congress people indicated that one of the issues that she thought that needs to be addressed was wage theft. And I was watching and I kind of jumped when I heard that. Another one, which is even more, because, we say reality mirrors fiction, fiction mirrors reality here. On the CBS, on the CBS show Blue Bloods on Friday night, it involved a situation where there was a former Colombian police officer who came to the States and was now working in construction. And what he was doing is he was stealing from the employer's site and giving stuff to employees who had been stolen from because they hadn't been paid. And this is really the first time I ever saw this issue brought up on a TV show. And I know it sounds silly, but it's important that this stuff, if it becomes more regular, if it gets into TV shows, as silly as it may sound, if it gets into all those crime shows that are out there, that wage theft is a problem and that wage theft is wrong, it's going to help educate the public to realize that this is a problem. So I diverge at first, but let me get back into a case I had. So I had been at the Nassau DA's office in a previous part of my life. And in 2013 or 14, I forget which it was, I went back into the New York State Attorney General's office in New York City. And at that point in time, the AG's office was working in cooperation with the U.S. Department of Labor, their wage and hour division, and they were collaborating on a basically fast food initiative for underpayment of wages. And the one specifically that I was looking at, among others, was dealing with different Papa John franchises in the New York metropolitan area. And again, so there were a number of different franchisors. Most of these franchisors owned multiple Papa John's locations. Okay, some of these cases went civil. Some of the and this one case went criminal. Now, one of the reasons was one of the things I was asked to do is one of the things I did when I came in is I read a whole bunch of depositions that were taken from certain employers in the Attorney General's investigative powers. And I had to calm Terry down and say, no, we can't do these cases criminally, even though this guy's admitted to a crime, because it's going to have everyone clam up at any other civil type of, when there's a civil investigation, the Attorney General's clam up. Luckily, I guess I got there in time for them not to have done this case, which involved an individual who had eight or six Papa John's locations throughout the Bronx. And he operated under a general company called BMY Enterprises. And Mr. Kokar owned all these franchises, and he basically had a main franchise where his office, where he ran all of them, came out of. We were very lucky in that we had very good witnesses. One of the things you're going to need to make any of these cases, and I think you've probably adduced this from listening to the other speakers, is workers or employees who are going to be willing to talk to you, workers who are going to be willing to go forward and go the whole 9 yards. Another tool that's great is grand jury subpoenas. Grand jury subpoenas are wonderful because you can get a lot of information, especially in prevailing wage cases, which Susan mentioned, which are paper heavy. And you can find a lot of inconsistencies there through subpoenaing workers' comp records, certified payrolls, payroll records of the company, timesheets of the company, records that are kept on site. But now getting back to this case, I was able to, because we had such a good witness force and pool, and we had such a really ripe case, we were able to execute a search warrant. And what we found out through talking to our witnesses, who were the ones instrumental in getting us the search warrant, is that what this individual did is there was a once a week pay was made, and there was one person who went around each week, basically to all the stores. He would start at the home office, and he would get all the money, and he'd be the guy dropping off all the money. And at the time he dropped it off, then he'd pick up the payroll records for the next week. The great thing is he was the guy who was willing to tell us what happened. So we had a wonderful person for information for a search warrant. We did not execute all of the records basically concerning the payroll. Were in two places. Any hard documents were located in the main office, which was in the Bronx. So we got a search warrant for that office. And we also got a search warrant for the computers in that office, because Papa John's had this payroll system where in order to do anything with anything for pizza, you had to press a button on a computer, right? So, if you ordered one, if you made one, if you did anything. What this individual was doing is he was not paying overtime to any of his employees. He basically set up a two-tier system where for hours worked over 40 hours a week, for the first 40 hours, I was Richard Balletta. For any hours above 40 hours, I was Samuel Smith. and I had different computer numbers assigned to me as a Richard Balletta and as a Samuel Smith. And so he would just pay straight hours to all his employees across all of the 6 restaurants he had. We executed the search warrant. We got tons of materials in hard copy. We got computer records. And when we started going through the hard copies,
This is your 5-minute warning.
we realized the employer really gave us the golden goose in that they had a green folders for every week, which were the cash payroll that were your second ID number. And we were able to basically come up with audits. We worked with the USDOL on this. This is another thing. If you're working with other agencies, since we all have limited resources, try to use those other agencies' resources. DOL did the audits for us, and we were able to get a conviction here of $280,000 in restitution, which was fully paid. We also got Mr. Kokar himself to spend 60 days in jail, the infamous Rikers Island, for any of you who are familiar with it. He pled guilty to a misdemeanor, though. The company pled guilty to a felony, but he still had to do 60 days in jail. And I also want to speak to something that Veronica said about misdemeanors. Misdemeanors are important. One of the things I plan on trying to do here in this office is do small cases with misdemeanors, because I have a staff there's a staff of attorneys in what we have district court here, the lowest level of crimes where misdemeanors are prosecuted. And I think it's important to get the word out that we're going to do these little cases too, because $2,000 or $1,000 to someone who has not been paid properly is something that the AG's office couldn't deal with, but it's something that can be dealt with on this level. And the last thing I just want to say is Terry mentioned how important it is because of enforcement and whatever, is that these cases are very important, because in criminal cases, people find money. In criminal cases, you cannot discharge restitution in bankruptcy, which is a huge thing. And last but not least, in one of the other Papa John's cases we had, which was done civilly, it was a great case, but also we ended up with an $800,000 judgment because the guy started hiding everything, and we were chasing him for years. He got divorced. He sold his house. We were able to eventually get maybe $200,000 out of it. But these things aren't going to happen as much when there's a criminal enforcement involved, especially when you're looking at jail time. And I would say Mr. Kokar's jail time came down because he was able to pay us the $280,000 up front. That was something that we would negotiate with him. And last but not least, I just want to say, because I know my time is running out, whenever I can, we would always try to use a plea agreement, which would set everything off and forward. And sometimes even in those plea agreements, we would set up a monitoring system. And if it was a corporation that was going on, especially in the construction industry, we might require them to hire a independent monitor who would report back to us. We'd give them a list of people. We wouldn't tell them who they had to use. And that those monitors would go over their payroll over the next couple of years, or how many years we thought was necessary to try to make sure that going forward, things were done correctly. Because the main goal is a conviction, getting 100% of the restitution for the workers, and making sure that if the business stays in business, that it's going to, and we hope it does, because we don't want to put people out of jobs, that they're going to be doing their payrolls and work correctly in the future. Thanks.